Hey, welcome back to Refuge Farm. Maya here. I'm going to do a video today kind of giving an update on how we build our raised beds. From the first set of beds that we built up in the front garden to the beds that we built in the high tunnel, we've made some changes. Before we finish the last bed in the greenhouse, as you can see, the other 3 rows of beds are done. But before we finish that last bed, we are going to go ahead and show you how we're assembling it and really just highlight all the improvements we've made from our first rendition of cedar and tin raised garden beds. Before we get to assembling the beds and showing you how we're doing that, I want to go over some of the material improvements that we've made. What I've got here is an example of what we used in the front garden, the original raised bed garden up front. And this is essentially just a small cedar tree that I got off of Craigslist. I paid $10 a post and they were 8-foot long posts. The widths of the posts varied greatly. And what that did is that really affected the spacing of the beds. That's why some of our beds look more wavy than others, because the post thickness was very different from post to post. On the sides, we ran what's called the first cuttings, which is what this is. The very first piece cut off the top of a cedar log, and we would basically run those on top and bottom with the flat side facing in. Now that worked good, but it did not work as good as I had hoped. So this time around, we decided to make some improvements, and that's where this other stack of material comes in. What we got here is a 3-inch by 4-inch cedar post. I actually had this milled at a local mill. It took me about 2 hours to get there and 2 hours to get home, so 4 hours of drive time and a little bit of gas. But I actually ended up buying these for $10 a post, which is the exact same price that I got those rounded posts for. And basically this gives me a flat edge all the way around and consistent spacing whenever we're assembling long beds. So this, being the same price, was way better for building raised beds. Another big improvement is the boards that we're running along the side are these milled down 2x cedar boards, and essentially this is just a slab cut off of a cedar tree, and it's got 2 rough edges, and then it's basically going to have 2 squared edges. And what we're doing on like something this wide, we'll probably get 2 runs of about 4 inches or so out of it. Now this is just a scrap piece that we're not using, but when we rip it down, what essentially that makes is a nice squared 4-inch wide board that we can run along the sides. The tin we're using is the exact same method that we did in the front. There was really nothing to improve on in that regard. We're still using repurposed salvage tin. You could use new tin if you needed to, but we just have a ton of this used stuff, so we're going to try and use it up as best we can. Those pieces come usually in about 3-foot wide sections. We figure out the middle, pop a line, and rip it. The next thing you need to do is figure out your dimensions. Ours is 4-foot wide, 60-foot long. Once we figured out our measurements and how far apart all of our spacing was, we started pre-cutting everything, and we basically got all of our wood cut before we even started assembling the bed. Now on this 60-foot bed, we are spacing our posts every 7 foot we're putting a post in. So that means that we cut our runners at 7 foot also, and then the post splits the difference whenever there's a seam. Now as far as the posts go, we cut ours at 20 inches. Now the tin is only 18 inches wide, but we cut them at 20, so that way you make sure that your tin always falls below the top edge of your bed. You don't want your tin sticking out above the top edge of your bed, because sometimes they can be pokey and sharp and cause problems and hurt yourself. So make sure that however wide your tin is, if it ends up being different than ours, that's okay. Just measure your tin, see how wide it is, and then add 2 inches on whenever you cut your posts. So we've got our bed laid out every 7 foot. Okay, and what you do is you're just going to secure your runners flush to each end like that. And you're going to secure your runners to your posts with these 3-inch deckmate screws. They're coated, they're not going to rust out. I don't use sheetrock screws for anything on the farm, especially when it's outside. These are just really tough, they're hard to break, and they're going to last. At the ends of your bed, so we've assembled everything, we've put all of our 3-inch screws in. I want to point something out now, I'll bring it up again later and show you why. But your last posts on both ends, you're going to leave an 1.5-inch gap, okay, at the top and at the bottom. The next thing you're going to want to do is lay out all of your tin for your sidewalls. Like we've already got all of ours cut and laid out. We had it all cut before we even started assembling the bed. We're gonna secure the tin to the runners using these 1 5/8" deck mate screws. Make sure not to over torque them because you can puncture these through the tin.
So as I'm going down through here and screwing these in, because this is a super long bed and sometimes like the wood will snake a little bit, I'm just picking up the metal a little bit and then shifting the frame so that I make sure that I'm staying straight all the way down, and then the metal will keep everything straight as we go.
So what we're going to do is stand up one side. This is definitely going to be a 2-person job. It might be a little easier if you had 3, but we're going to stand it up on one side and put in the end pieces that essentially secure both walls, and then we'll slide in the end wall tin pieces. We got them standing up. We put our end pieces on, which is what's holding it. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and slide in our end pieces of tin. Now before, when I told you to leave a gap on your end posts, okay, right here, the reason for that is that that's going to create a space for your end piece of tin to just slide right down into. Ben's going to show us how that works. Just work it on down. Bam, that was pretty easy. Okay, and you see, fits. And now what that does, we've learned, is it creates a pretty good seal from tin to tin whenever you're going to secure the bed and fill it with dirt. The reason why I feel like it's important to mention this is because on the last go around of bed design and application, we did not do that, and we ended up having to either cut pieces of tin to fill in the gap so dirt wouldn't fall out, or we just had to like really finagle getting the end piece in, and it was so frustrating then that when we came to build new beds, I designed a new way to do it that was way more efficient and way more functional. If you look behind me, you can see that the bed's kind of leaning. This side of the bed's leaning in, that side's kind of leaning out, the spacing's not right. And you'll notice that we didn't dig any holes or concrete any posts in like we did before. Trying to concrete the posts and square everything last time is what caused our beds to be very inconsistent. And so that was also something I was really wanting to improve upon this go around. And the system that we came up with to secure the bed and make it structurally sound, especially at 60 foot long, which is even longer than our long beds in the front garden, I think you guys are really gonna like. So what we're using to secure this is a recycled chain link fence post. Now we've used 2 different kinds of diameters because we just had them on hand. This one is actually a piece of top rail. There's also the actual fence posts themselves, or ground stakes are also called. Yeah, you could use either one. We have used both diameters and they seem to secure just fine. Once you figure out where your bed's gonna be, you're just gonna set your post, your drive post in the corner, and then you're gonna drive it with a sledgehammer, correct? And we've used the T-post driver. We actually have used, I think, 3 different methods to drive these, but I think we ended up settling on the sledgehammer as being the most efficient and effective way. Now you're gonna drive it until you start to mushroom the top. Once the top starts to flatten out, it's probably not going to go much deeper, and at that point, if there's anything sticking up above the ground, you can just cut it off. Okay, see, the top's starting to flatten out, so that's about as deep as we're going to go. Once you have the poles driven, you're going to do 2 pilot holes with a 3/16 metal approved bit. You're going to basically do 2 holes, one at the top, one at the bottom, and then you're going to secure your metal pole or your metal drive stake to your cedar post, and that is essentially how you tie the 2 systems together. Now we're going to run these bracing posts along every single one of our cedar posts that we did. And what that's going to do is give us consistency on the walkways. It's going to give us consistency on the width of the bed. Once we finish all of the drive stakes and secure them to the cedar posts, all that would be left is filling the bed. Now, in a little while, once we have an opportunity to, I'm actually going to run a 1x5 cedar cap. That 1x5 cedar cap is essentially just going to run the top of all the beds all the way around. That was one thing about the other design that we had that I did not like, was that there was no place to sit down. There's no place to really set things except inside the bed, which can be risky depending on what level your seedlings are at. All right, here's your finished product. These are the first 3 rows of beds that we built. Right there. You see how straight they are with their bracing, all the equal spacing. It looks really good. Well guys, that about does it for this rendition of upgrading our Roots and Refuge garden beds. I hope some of those tips and tricks that we've changed will help you guys build some better beds in the future. And I bless you guys. Until next time.